Hello, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about the essence of evil. Over the years, I have read numerous books on evil people, evil empires, evil ideologies, and I've also looked at numerous videos of insidious and sinister people talking and behaving. One thing that I have noticed that is a reoccurring pattern in the behavior or in the ways of sinister people is that they victimize others while they play the victim, or they victimize others and then once they are backed into a corner, or when they are caught, or when they are facing justice, they play the victim. So truly, this is a part of the essence of evil. Victimizing others while playing the victim, or victimizing others only to later on play the victim when you are facing the face of justice. Many years ago, when I was living in the Bay Area in Northern California, my father was called to partake in jury duty. And my father was in a jury for a murder trial. A woman by the name of Kendra Bernard strangled her mother to death and decapitated her, and also chopped her body up. This murder took place in a city called Antioch, and if you are from Northern California, you probably have heard of Antioch, and you probably have heard nothing good about it because, at least when I was living there, it was known as a dark and grim and dismal city. It wasn't a place that was generally known to have a wholesome environment. Let's just put it that way. Kendra Bernard, if I remember correctly, she at first beat her mother with a blunt object and then spent 5 whole minutes strangling her mother to death. Decapitated her, chopped her up to pieces, and then tried to hide her mother's dismembered corpse. She got help from her boyfriend, who was a biker. And the dispute between Kendra Bernard and her mother began with Kendra partying hard with her boyfriend in her mother's apartment. She was living with her mother while her mother was working very hard to make ends meet. So while her mother was working strenuously, her daughter, Kendra, while Kendra's mother was working very strenuously, Kendra herself was really being a loser. Kendra's mother basically then told her to leave her apartment. She didn't want her boyfriend around. And she also didn't like the fact that her boyfriend was literally parking his motorcycle inside of the apartment. Not outside in the parking lot, but literally inside her apartment. So she basically told her daughter and her boyfriend, her daughter's boyfriend, to get the hell out. Kendra Bernard then decided to murder her mother. She murdered her mother, and then she asked her boyfriend for help to dismember the body. And my father had to sit through listening to this story. Not only that, but my father also had to look at photos of the dismembered body, of the head, of pieces of the body that were severed. It was very, very disturbing, and I remember my father going through that jury duty, and it was a very dismal and depressing time, really. But Kendra Bernard, acted as if she was a victim. She tried to blame her boyfriend. She also tried to blame meth because she was high off of meth when she was cutting up the body. And there were people in the jury duty who believed that Kendra Bernard should be convicted of second-degree murder, not first-degree murder. My father and another juror stood their ground and affirmed that Kendra Bernard was guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated first-degree murder. And my father remembers how when he was in the room with the other jurors, my father said this woman committed premeditated murder, so she should be found guilty of first-degree murder. And another juror looked at my father and said, "Oh, give her a break," as if she was a victim. So while this woman murdered her innocent mother, chopped her mother's body up to pieces, and acted as if nothing happened, and then continued to defend herself as if she was a victim, as if she was just this poor woman who simply made a mistake, a juror listens to the story and says, "Give her a break." Nothing about justice for the woman that was murdered by her own daughter. No, nothing about that whatsoever. Let's have sympathy for the devil. Bottom line, let's have sympathy for the devil. And speaking of the devil, Kendra Bernard was also obsessed with Satanism. Her own father attested to this. It was either her father or some other member of her family attested to this, that she was obsessed with Satanism. So for all we know, this could have been a ritual murder. And that's really what we've come down to. We have come down to looking at murderers and having sympathy for them while having zero sympathy for the victims. Our justice system has become absolutely plagued with this. Now, in the case of Kendra Bernard, she was found guilty of first-degree murder. It was quite apparent that she committed premeditated murder, especially given the fact that after murdering her mother, she went to the local Walmart to buy a machete, and there was a receipt for this purchase, and that was one of the key pieces of evidence to prove premeditated murder, because she would use that machete to dismember her mother's body. Yes, I know this is a very gruesome and horrific story. Welcome to the United States, everybody. And if you want to move to America, remember that this is a country that does have a psycho problem. It's not just the Muslims that are killing people in America. It's not just terrorists. Americans love talking about, oh, terrorists are killing Americans. Americans are killing each other every single day, way more so than any Islamic terrorist group. But going back to the subject at hand, years later, I want to say in 2016, somewhere in the mid or late 20-teens, Kendra Bernard tried to appeal her sentencing. And of course, she blamed her boyfriend. I think she blamed her legal representation. She said that she was not represented adequately. Of course, the judge struck it down because of that receipt from Walmart. But nonetheless, she is playing the victim. I am a victim. Even though I murdered an innocent woman, my mother of all people, I am a victim. It reminds me of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, there's a video that you can watch of Ted Bundy talking before being sentenced, before being found guilty of being a mass murderer, in which Ted Bundy is talking about how innocent he was. I am innocent. I have been wrongfully accused. I will be found innocent. He was so certain of himself. Look at me. I'm being falsely accused of murdering all these women. It's horrible. I am being unjustly accused, unjustly treated. And then Ted Bundy is found guilty of mass murder. He is sentenced to death, and he was rightfully executed. And if you look at his interview before his execution, he was talking to that guy from Focus on the Family, and and all of a sudden he found Jesus. All of a sudden he found the Lord. Oh, you didn't find the Lord before you were found guilty. You were defending yourself. All of a sudden you found Jesus when death was coming. And one thing I've realized with evil people, with insidious people, with sadistic people, is that they have this, I want to call it a strategy, but I guess you could call it a strategy or a pattern of behavior, wherein they push and then they release. They push and then they release. They push and then they release. They push when their victim is open for attack, and they let go and they play the victim when they face justice or when justice is nigh. So a great example of this is looking at cops arresting people. I've seen so many videos where police officers will go to somebody, go to a suspect, and they say, hey, you're being investigated. And the guy will give the most difficult time to the officers. Why are you here? Are you investigating me? Am I being detained? Why do you have to see my identification? For what? Why are you here? I'm being mistreated. You're a tyrant. You're evil. You're blah, 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 blah. When the cops have had enough and they tase the guy, or they sick a German Shepherd on the guy, or they just pull him out and slap the handcuffs on him, all of a sudden the guy goes from being a strong machismo resistor against the tyranny of the police to being an innocent victim. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll comply. Oh my God. Oh. There's a funny story. Not really. Well, it's not really funny, but there's a story that I read from the I want to say it's from the 15th century or so, or 14th century. It was in the time of Johnhuss, famous heretic. He's considered to be the morning star of the Protestant Reformation, and Johnhuss went around teaching essentially schism and rebellion against the Catholic Church and ultimately against the Holy Roman Empire, because the Hussites were the people who followed Jan Hus. The Hussite movement ultimately was more of a separatist movement against the Holy Roman Empire than anything else. And they gave Jan Hus so many chances to repent. They gave him so many chances to forsake his heresies and his ideology, and he just continuously refused. He just refused and refused and he refused, and he was very obstinate, very stubborn. So then eventually the government got so sick of him that they sentenced him to death, and he started crying. And the person who was overlooking the trial or whatever said, why are you weeping? I gave you so many chances, and now all of a sudden you're crying? This is part of the nature of evil. Terrorists play this game. Terrorists will play this game where they'll go out. It's not much of a game, but I guess it's a game in their own sick heads. But they'll go out and they'll murder people. They'll blow buildings up, kill innocent people, do all sorts of horrific things, behead people. And then the government says, okay, we have to crack down on this. They start cracking down on it. Then the terrorists say, oh God, look, we're victims. Oh goodness, a thought just came to my mind. The Ukrainian nationalists, within the first half of the 20th century, Ukrainian nationalists would literally go, Ukrainian nationalists who were living under the Polish government would literally go around murdering people, assassinating people, committing acts of terrorism. And then the Polish government said, okay, we have to crack down on Ukrainian separatism. And they arrested people. They did mass arrests. And the Ukrainians had an entire international network of protesters, and they would tell Ukrainians in America, Ukrainians in Canada, Ukrainians in different Western countries to protest and to express their angst and the pain of the Ukrainian people to all of the embassies of the countries that they were living in. And truly, what was this? It was push-pull. It was push and release. It was, we're going to commit acts of terrorism. And then when we get the backlash, when we get the response, then we're going to play the victim. This is a very typical strategy that all evil people play. They murder, they slaughter, they persecute, they harass, they assault, they victimize, and then they play the victim. And so much of our justice system is plagued with this. We talk about how our criminal justice system is so unjust because it puts people in prison or whatever. But the reality is that I would say that the corruption that lies within our criminal justice system truly entails giving too much leniency to the worst of America's criminals. So, for example, not just in America, but in other Western countries as well. So, for example, the worst part of prison is for the most dangerous part of American prisons are the places where they put people who have committed assault or they've robbed or they've sold drugs. They put those people in a part of the prison where you have the most violent inmates. And that's where you have a lot of murders take place and assaults and rapes. That's the scariest part of prison. But for the Dahmers or for the Kempers or for the Dennis Raiders, they put them all in death row, maximum security, where they get colored television, potato chips, and all sorts of goodies, and they get all sorts of privileges. And that's actually literally the safest place in prison. So our worst criminals get treated the best in prison. That is what I would say is most definitely a ugly taint within America's justice system. Almost finished reading this book, The Death of Punishment by Robert Blecker. Reading this book, I would love to talk to Robert Blecker. You know, some of you guys say, Ted, you should interview this guy, interview some Catholic apologist or some Catholic guy or whatever. I want to interview this guy. I want to interview the guy who wrote this book. I actually called him up today, left a message. Hopefully he'll give me a call back. I would love to talk to this guy because he has some very interesting opinions and very interesting experiences pertaining to how America's most egregious criminals are treated with the best of conditions within America's prison system. But he goes on to say, so Robert Blecker was asked to come to Connecticut. So years and years ago, there was this horrific murder that I know America's full of murders. We're famous for the worst murders. There was this horrific murder that took place in Connecticut. Two guys broke into a family's home. They raped the daughter. There were two daughters, a wife and a husband. They tied the husband up. I think they raped the wife. They raped the daughters, and then they tied the girls to mattresses. They doused them with gasoline and lit them on fire. Like, this was some of the most. I'm telling you, America. I know there are other countries that are worse than America, but dang it, America has some serious problems. I am not exaggerating when America has some serious demons. I don't know. Maybe somebody can explain this to me, but America's got some serious problems. You could take Islam out, no Muslims in America, America would still have some truly, truly messed up people. So there were people saying that these two murderers who killed, and the husband, he didn't die, but the wife and the two daughters did. And there were people saying that the people who murdered these women and burned them alive, raped them and burned them alive, they should not be killed. They should not be given capital punishment because, compassion and all this bullshit. So Robert Blecker was asked to come to Connecticut to stand as a defender of the death penalty for this case and ultimately for the state of Connecticut. So this is what he said when he gave his speech in Connecticut. He said, 1 month after being sentenced to life without parole for the rape and murder of a child, that person will be outside his cell, free to shower, talk on the phone, play with others, wreck indoors or out, 10 to 12 hours a day. every day for the rest of his life, 10 to 12 hours a day, within 1 month of being sentenced to life without parole for the rape and murder of a child, you tell me this is justice. Ask yourself, why is there no punishment? I'll tell you why there's no punishment in Connecticut, or no punishment in Tennessee, Oklahoma, Ohio, Florida, and other states I visited. Because not one word in any Department of Corrections mission statement in the United States of America mentions the word punishment. Not one. Officers say it is not our job to punish. It is our job to keep the people of Connecticut safe, keep the inmates safe from each other, and help those preparing to go outside to reintegrate into society. There's an interdisciplinary arts program, including dance, poetry, sculpture. More prisoners want to get into it than there are spaces. Do they take those who murdered and raped children last? No. You submit a portfolio, it's on the basis of talent. Everything is future-oriented. Life begins when life begins at day one inside. And you ask the officers, is this justice? Answer, justice is not my issue. Is this punishment? Answer, punishment is not part of our mission. The judge punishes them. Don't take my word for it. Tour the prisons. You're the legislator. They can't deny you. Ask the question I asked. Is it your job to punish? Is there any different lifestyle for those who committed the most serious crimes? I told them of my visit to death row, which housed Stephen Hayes. Stephen Hayes was one of the guys who murdered the women in the house, raped and burned alive the women in that house in Connecticut. The Petit family murderer. I peeked into Stephen Hayes' cell to see this man who raped, who doused them with gasoline and lit them. He was sleeping. On his desk, a Hershey bar. On the empty bunk above him, bags of potato chips and other goodies from the commissary. All these little pleasures in life. This is not justice. And then he goes on to say, from the first day on death row, if you have the money in your commissary, you can get a color TV. It may take months or years in general population if you're a drug dealer or a car thief. But if you raped and murdered a child, if you've got the money, that TV is yours from day one. That is not justice. And people will defend this and they'll say, oh no, we have to have compassion. Oh no, we have to have compassion. Compassion for the murderer. And this is truly the essential reality of how these people are. In their sick world, the murderer can kill innocent people, but the murderer can't be executed under the state. They can rape. They can murder. They can pillage and massacre entire families. Just look at the story of Charles Ng, if you don't believe in me when I say entire families can be murdered. But the mass murderer can't be executed. So in their world, the sadists amongst us can rape and kill, but the sadists themselves cannot be killed. That's their warped, sick world. Compassion for those who are absent of compassion is not compassion. It's sympathy for terrorists, sympathy for terrorizers, sympathy for the devil. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.